call the Committee of the Whole meeting to order for May 8th, 2023. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Secretary, roll call, please.
Mr. Barnes? Mrs. Burdick? Here. Mr. Curran? Mr. Sear?
Here.
Mr. Demick?
Here.
Mr. Fanton? Mrs. Hanchett?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Havey? Mr. Healy?
Here.
Mr. Rickey?
Here.
Mrs. Ricketts Swales?
Here.
Mrs. Root?
Here.
Mr. Rumfelt? Mr. Stockin?
Here.
10 present, 5 absent.
Thank you, ma'am. The purpose of the meeting this morning is to be provided with a presentation from members of Delta Development. I want to thank Darren Asper and Luke Gallion for joining us today. I also want to recognize Randy Shaler, Mayor of Wellsville. Thank him for joining us today. We're going to get about a half-hour presentation from Darren and Luke. And then after that, we'll have the availability to talk with each other, kind of get to know each other a little bit, questions, and hopefully come out of this meeting with a pretty good idea on both sides of board goals, priorities, better understanding of Delta and how they function and what they can do for the county. So with that, Darren, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the board, and also those gathered in the audience, staff. And just wanted to thank you. Thank you for having us up here today. Thank you for bringing us on board to talk about funding opportunities and how we work, and talk a little bit about state and federal funding, how we put projects together. For some of you, what I'm going through will be familiar to you. You've worked through grants, you've worked through kind of the process of reimbursement, and so it'll be familiar. For others, it'll be something new, something that maybe you're not familiar with, or you might have an idea in your mind, how grants work, how the funding process works. So hopefully today we could talk a little bit about that process and how we move forward. You should have on your desks this package. It is actually a copy of the presentation today. There's a few times I will refer to attachments. You'll see that in the presentation. It's for your benefit. I can also send electronic copies if you want to see that as well. So just going to the packet, and the presentation, of course, is up front. We'll go through this, and we'll talk a little bit about maybe some potential priority projects and then how we would want to proceed. So, sir, do you need a copy?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll give you one.
Thank you.
Okay. Does everyone have a copy now? I know some of you in the back might not, but, okay. So, trying to advance this slide. Can you advance that up front? For some reason, the clicker now is not working. Is it going? Yeah. I'll just let you know when to advance it. Okay, so a little bit about Delta. We are based out of Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, and that's right outside the state capital of Harrisburg. We also have on our team a member from Lincoln Concepts, Julie Klopecki. I'll talk a little bit about her background in just a few minutes. But we work across the country. We do a lot of work in Pennsylvania, but we're also doing work in New York, Washington State, West Virginia, New Jersey, and Maryland, just to name a few. Our professionals, our skill set and background is in community planning, government relations, transit, emergency management. So we have professionals that have come from those backgrounds and understand maybe some of the positions that you guys are in terms of municipal work or emergency management or planning itself. I myself, I'm a certified planner. I have about 30 years of planning experience. We have a very keen understanding of the federal and state funding landscape. And so what we like to do is, I know Allegheny County has put together award-winning comprehensive plans. You should be congratulated for that. Economic development strategies, strategic plans. We enjoy doing that, but what we really like to do is to implement the plan, to take the section in the back of the plan, say, what are the priorities? How do we get it done? How do we put together that funding strategy to make something work? How does that work? So in addition to that, once you receive the grant funding, it's like, all right, that's great. We got the funding for this industrial park or this housing project. Then it's the whole compliance project, the drawdown of the grants. And that can be really time consuming, and it honestly can be a pain. So we work through that process as well with our clients in terms of drawdown and compliance. Next slide. This is our project team, but it's not the only people that will be working on this project. You'll really have professionals from our team of 35. Leroy Klein is our president and CEO. Leroy has started the company back in 1988. We just celebrated our 35th anniversary. I know that Leroy and Tim worked together in State College in Center County. That's how Tim referred us to Allegheny County as our work there. I mentioned Julie Klopecki. She's the owner of Lincoln Concepts. Julie's background is she worked back in the late 90s on the T21 legislation. And there was a member of Congress, Bud Schuster, who was very instrumental with that. It was a transformative piece of legislation throughout the country. So Julie worked with a lobbying firm to help put that together and put together some great projects that have been built today. I mentioned Luke, who's with us today, and Dane Higbee, a senior associate. Luke, Dane, and I have a fair amount of New York experience. We're currently working with the city of Saratoga Springs on funding initiatives. So we wanted to bring that New York experience to your projects because we understand some of the New York funding, and we're going to talk about some of those programs as we go through the presentation. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, some of the illustrative project experience, just running through a couple of these. I mentioned Saratoga Springs. We did some hazard mitigation planning work in Yonkers. We did an energy initiative with Wegmans. And then you see a list of other clients that we've had across the country, everything from Middlebury College in Vermont to New Jersey Economic Development Authority, working in Ohio, West Virginia. So that's just a list of the communities we've worked in and the types of funding we've secured: transportation, community development, energy projects. Those are just some of the things that we've worked on. Next slide. Okay, so what I wanted to do now is talk a little bit about the public funding process. And as I mentioned in the introduction, for those of you who work through grants, this will be review. For those of you who are not familiar with this, I wanted to provide a roadmap of how this works. It's not just about submitting the blank or the grant application and then hoping for the best. There's a process here. So the way we work is, we have a kickoff meeting like this with the client to discuss projects. What are the priority projects? And this can be anything from community development, economic development, tourism, transportation, water and sewer. And then from those projects, we develop a list of funding priorities that we help you with and how we frame those out. And once we identify those priorities, we then look at the resources from all the federal, state, maybe foundational, local funding that can put together that project. So we develop that list of funding resources. You can go to the next slide. Once we do that, we work with you as the client, as the county, collecting data. We kind of give you a sense of what kind of data we're looking for that will maximize the project submission. And then once the project is submitted, there's a bunch of next steps in terms of what we call outreach, government relations, working with your local legislators at state level, federal level, also meeting with program administrators, just so they understand the projects, the opportunities, and what the county wants to advance. Okay, next slide. And then once that's submitted, we have a post-submission communication strategy. We're going to talk a little bit at the end of my presentation. One of the things we strongly urge is we develop a core project team, maybe with staff, to have calls on a monthly basis or every other week, just to go through what we've applied for, what's coming up, what are our next steps, wins, in terms of projects and what we need to do. And then once the funding's awarded, you go through the funding drawdown and compliance. And that's everything from reimbursement agreements, documentation, and project closeout. Those are things that we work through the grant application process. So we work with you start to finish, and that kind of gives you an illustration of how that works. Next. Okay, so when we work with our clients, we like to identify what we call a quick win. Because when you go through this process and you're signing up on a contract, you're wondering, well, how long is it going to take to see the results of what we do? So I'm pleased to report, I think we're on a path for that. Right when we got started, I think it was in late March or April, we said, hey, look, the community-funded project applications are due to Congressman Langworthy in a week. And your team got together with us. We put together what was the Fairgrounds Project and what is now called in the legislation the Allegheny County Outdoor Agricultural Community Space Improvements Project. So that's the way it's listed. And so your congressman has advanced that project to the committee level. The funding request is, as you can see, is for $425,000 for a total project cost of about $570,000. And the scope of that, we had a really good application that you guys worked through, infrastructure improvements associated with the fairgrounds. So what do we do next? The next step is continue to communicate with the congressman's office, the senator's office, to talk about the status of the project, how it's going. And in terms of a timeline, in terms of when we could see that funding, I was asked that last night when we got together. Last year, there was legislation that was approved towards November and December of the year. We anticipate that will be the case this year, that the federal legislation will get approved. But there's always a chance that there could be a continuing resolution and it could go into next year. But, we think that it's going to get approved by the end of the year. Okay, next slide. I included in your packet an application checklist. And so if you go to attachment 1, I just wanted to show you real briefly. This is kind of a universal checklist of what we look for in funding. It's everything from the project description, detailed cost estimates, the map, the consistency, the economic impact. We will work with your staff for every application to put together the funding checklist for that particular program and identify what needs to be put together for the project. So that's important to have that organized for your projects. Okay, next slide. So how do we identify your priorities? Well, you have several county plans, comprehensive plans and strategies. I know that the chairman handed out this survey that some of you filled out and has priorities. So that's one way of identifying it. Another is to look at legislative priorities. What does your congressman want to focus on in terms of projects? We included some of those: rural development, economic development. Your senators, Senator Gillibrand, She's, into revitalizing communities. I know Senator Schumer, in addition to what's listed up there, he likes also emergency management projects. I know he invested a lot of money into City of Saratoga Springs for one of their projects. The other thing we like to do is look at the funding calendar. So if you go to the next slide, some forthcoming funding opportunities, and this is not all-inclusive. This is just some examples. We have the USDOT Safe Streets, which is like a community pedestrian improvement project. We have the WIA grants at the state level that are due at the end of July for water sewer. And then we have the CFA funding applications for a variety of grants. And I just listed on this slide, you can go to the next slide, what those are. And so we should be thinking about what the opportunities are for Allegheny County for projects that are ready to go in those categories. We worked with some of those in the past, but really over the summer we should be thinking about, what realistically could we advance in this program. Next slide. The other category of funding I call unique funding opportunities. Some of these you might be familiar with. Appalachian Regional Commission. There's additional funding put into this program at the federal level. It has a nice match requirement. But within the ARC program, there's some other initiatives to think about. There's one called the ARISE program, Appalachian Regional Initiative for Stronger Economies. That's for regional initiatives. So it might be multi-county efforts, multi-state efforts, if you want to work with Pennsylvania. And what I'll mention about that is that we currently work in the state of Pennsylvania with the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development to help them identify key ARC projects. So if there's a partnership that you want to form there, we have some good contacts. So those are some unique opportunities. I also mentioned a Farm Bill. That's a 5-year federal legislation. There might be some initiatives within your farming community that you want to advance. If nothing else, you should really put together a letter of correspondence with the Congressman's office to talk about key agricultural projects. So with that, I know staff has gotten together to talk about key projects and a discussion of those. We've also put in here some other initiatives related to funding. I think there are some prior slides, but I'll just touch upon those. We have the funding roadmaps, but with the key projects, I know staff has looked at about 5 or 6 of those. There's the countywide sewer study, where there's been a commitment of ARC funds that we can certainly talk through and discuss. There's the upgrades in Alfred, Almond, and Friendship. I think there's been some prior funding for that, so we need to see, what's the status of that plan? What are the first sewer and water projects that could come out of that? And then the County Road 46 bridge replacement, $15 million project. What's the status of that project in terms of engineering and the next steps there? I mentioned to the team, sometimes you want to look at key initiatives and possibilities. If that bridge is a key piece of infrastructure in terms of flooding and hazards, and it's listed in your hazard mitigation plan, we just helped fund a bridge project through the FEMA BRIC program because it was listed within the community's hazard mitigation plan. So that's a little bit of a unique twist to funding that you could look at. If you want to go to the next 2 projects. We also talked about the Rural Health Initiative with Cuba Hospital and Jones Memorial. This is a longer-term initiative. It's mental health treatment is a big issue throughout our country, and especially in rural areas. So I think here you probably need to work with those healthcare facilities and identify a strategy in terms of what you want to do in a community. So that's a longer-term option. And then the DPW multi-use facility, which could include bus transportation, maintenance, 911 center. With those distribution of uses, there's a lot of possibilities for federal and state funding. But again, we got to think through the application process. You saw that attachment 1. What's been done in terms of the cost estimates, project description, preliminary work, and then we can help match that up to potential state and federal funding. I just wanted to mention one more thing before we have questions and discussions. I know the mayor from Wellsville is here today, and you were successful with the New York Forward application. That's a great accomplishment. You also want to look at, in your county, how you take something like that, where you have $4.5 million, and how does that leverage additional investment in Wellsville or other communities for things that are county initiatives. So that's a great program at the state level. It's a great investment for Wellsville. It's something that maybe there's opportunities to match up to what the county wants to do. So with that, that's my overview. Happy to take questions, comments. We maybe want to have a discussion about what the key projects have been listed here at this point and identify, how we want to proceed. So, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. Before we get in too heavy with questions, I want to just mention those projects that he just described that the administrative team submitted. A couple of them are probably almost haven't even been talked about in these chambers. But I think what Darren and Luke had asked for were projects that kind of run the spectrum, right? Come out of different kind of bigger silos, whether it's public safety or human services or whatever. But, and I hope you'll talk about this a little bit right now, is these were recognized, other than the rural health thing, recognized as projects that at least have been recognized somewhere, for instance, in the comprehensive plan, and that there's been at least some portion of work and money put towards the implementation of these projects. So can you talk about how important that is as far as the application process?
Yeah, that's a great point. So within your comprehensive plan, usually when you complete a comprehensive plan, I've done a lot of them, you'll have a laundry list of recommendations and opportunities. And so what I think the administrative team did is they identified those projects from that comprehensive plan and other county initiatives that are ready to go. So when you talk to either a congressional office or, state funding agency, they want to know, okay, you want $1 million for this sewer upgrade. Where do you stand with the engineering studies? Is it done? Do you have all the environmentals done? Do you have historical clearance? Those are things that they want to see work through before they're willing to commit funding. I know, Luke, we worked through the WIA grant process. There's a whole list of things that they want to see. So that is essentially important, that projects are well-positioned and ready to go.
And as far as what projects might be more intriguing to a state or federal elected, are there certain dollar amounts that seem to be in a sweet spot? Does it depend upon the funding source? Can you talk to that?
Yeah, so in terms of funding sources, it really depends upon what you're going after. And what we would do in helping you develop a funding strategy is to say, for this particular federal appropriations or state funding, these are the typical award sizes that have been awarded over the last year or two. So, we could see on a list that the typical award size might be anywhere from $750,000 to $2 million. So we want to be in that target area. Federal appropriations, for example, the Fairgrounds project, that's a great number. I see appropriations that are larger than that, it could be $2 million, but I think, you've really put something together that's in a good spot.
Have you found that, thinking about looking at all, you said the laundry list of the comp plan,
Yeah.
have you found that projects that tend to be intermunicipal, in other words, more than one township, or a county-town partnership, or a private public partnership, do those tend to be more successful?
Yes, they do. So some of the programs at the federal and state level are targeted for intermunicipal, could be intermunicipal water sewer projects. I mentioned the Appalachian Regional Commission ARISE program. They want to see a regional initiative, could be multi-county or multi-state. So yes, it is stronger. You can make a stronger case if it's a regional initiative.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? Mr. Healy?
How about the total economic impact?
Yes, that is very important. So usually they want to see, the reviewers want to see a community impact, how many homes a sewer expansion is going to assist. But economic impact is important because what we use is a tool called IMPLAN, which is Impact Analysis for Planning, that helps generate job creation for a particular community impact, and then what the ripple effects are, down the road for the economy. So that is critical for an application. It's a good point.
Do they ever do any funding for economic development zones, IDA zones?
What are you referring to specifically, like an enterprise zone or?
Like an industrial park?
Oh, yeah, industrial park. That's a good place to be because you're doing specific job creation. So, yes.
Any other questions? Anything from the back? Any comments or questions? What I'm looking forward to is for the county to begin to understand what exactly within an application makes it more attractive. When we first met with you about a month ago, and we had to scramble for those couple projects, I thought it was really interesting how just something as simple as a name change from Crossroads to Gateway, or just the addition of a component to an overall project, whether it's a cultural center or an arts center or whatever, would make funding that much more likely. And it'll be interesting when we go through this list of projects how we can get creative, even if it's something, if we've identified DPW facilities as a target, that may not in and of itself be something that would be easy to get outside funding for. But if you pair it for things like transit or if you add some kind of green energy component to it, it will be beneficial when we seek that outside funding. So I'm looking forward to that in particular. Mike?
Well, I think one of the biggest assets we can have in the county that we've underutilized is the I-86
Yeah.
corridor. And it's an interstate, which I would think would be put in good, in place we have good land accessible to the interstate. I would think would put us in good stead for funding for economic development.
Yeah.
Just because it's, first off, it's already a federal road.
Yeah.
It's, we know development always follows the transportation corridors from the history of time, and it's an easy lift. It's easy. Thank you.
Good.
Legislator Burdick.
You mentioned that when you get ready to apply for the grant that you need to have your engineering studies done and, all the stuff that goes behind that, which is very costly. So I guess, is there any grants that that you look at that would include paying for some of those studies? I mean, you want them done before you apply for this money.
Yeah, and I should clarify that every application's different. Some might want just a concept plan, where there's a general understanding of cost. Others, when you get more into some of the state infrastructure programs, they want the more detailed engineering estimates. And so I think there's some funding at the state level that can help with some of those engineering studies, and we'd have to look at that. So, good.
For sewer and water.
Yeah, for sewer and water.
Legislator Ricky?
Yes, are you willing to write grants for towns and villages? I know Wellsville got the one, but they're
Yeah.
kind of the exception to the rule. They're their biggest village, and they've got a lot of one-horse towns in this county. They just don't have the manpower.
Yeah. Yeah, so we are under contract with the county, so I think it would be up to the county to decide what the priorities are from a county standpoint. So that's really going to be this group ultimately, right? So that would be up to this group. Anything, if it's individual to a community that the county, doesn't necessarily want to advance, we could maybe talk, about contracting separately to help with that. But we don't want to be in conflict with what the county's doing, so.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to sound selfish, but we talked about this a little bit last
Yeah.
night, too. If it's something that's truly intermunicipal, whether it's the Almond Alford sewer project or whatever, it probably would be appropriate for the county to have a hand in that. But, we want the best bang for our buck for the whole county, I don't know if you do contract with small municipalities like that or not, but.
We do, but the one thing we always are careful about is we don't want to, one community to go after funding that the county's also going after, and it could generate competition, make it difficult, in terms of promoting both projects. So in this situation, counties first in terms of our priorities, and, we can talk about other things as they come up.
Jen?
I'm looking at your key projects, which are all great things, but does recreation also fit into this at some point? Like, I don't know, it seems like that's something that goes across all towns and.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a great initiative. And again, I should mention, this was a first, cut from the staff, because I had asked, like, wow, you got this comprehensive plan, you got other things going on, there's like 50 initiatives. Let's try to start narrowing it down to project readiness. But a recreation project, you're absolutely correct. If it's regional in nature, it has like regional or state or national impact, those are good projects. And there's programs out there to help fund those.
Any other questions, comments? Please do.
Well, I can tell you where my concerns are that I think our priorities should be. I think that, our tax base is not growing here, and the socioeconomic makeup of our communities is not going in the right direction. And I'd like to see us focus our priorities instead of towards feel-good or pork for one area or the other, towards where we're really going to make a big economic impact, either via sales tax or blue-collar jobs primarily. And I say that because those are the jobs that populate our schools and create our tax base on the residential level, not only the industrial level. We have to have increase our revenues, because I'm sure we only have two places to get our local share of the budget: sales tax and property taxes.
Yeah.
And so if our tax base is not growing and demands on our local share is growing, then we have to increase our sales tax primarily from outside sources would be nice to help supplement a lot of these other plans that we would like to have in our communities.
That's good. Yeah, I would agree with that. In terms of, your industrial base, we didn't talk about so much in here, but one of the other initial projects we looked at was the Gateway project. And, as an outsider coming into your community, I think there could be really good potential there. I know there's some things about acquiring property, but having that kind of regional business park, would definitely help the community.
So Darren, what would you say if you were going to give the board some homework
Yeah.
What would that be over the next, say in the short term and then in the long term?
I would say, short term, we have a list of projects here that were initially identified. We want to see if those are your key priority projects. So that's one step for the board and for staff that they've initially looked at. The second part of that is, in working with the staff, I would say we'd want to put together a key project team with staff. So we're communicating with them like every 2 weeks. Because there's so much funding happening right now, funding applications. And it's not just, hey, this application is opening up. We got to follow through, identify the project, put together the application, the letters of support. So those, twice a month phone calls are going to be important. So those are two things, zeroing in on the projects, and also we set up, time where we're communicating like every 2 weeks with staff.
So say this board comes up with a new project or a new priority, or we have an an emergency come up where all of a sudden we have something that we need that we didn't realize we needed. What's the first step, other than communicating with administration and saying, okay, this is a known priority. We would like Delta to investigate whether or not there's outside funding sources for X. What then? What do we do?
So if there was something that emerges, a need or an opportunity, you could certainly reach out to me directly, or, whoever's managing the communications from the staff end of it. We get together on a call, we talk through it. We'll do our research and say, hey, this is what could be out there for funding. This is a timetable, and we can put that together with you. So.
And then you could come back to us and say, okay, here are some funding sources, here are the deadlines,
Yep.
here's what you need to have in place in order to make this application. Then you go to attachment 1,
Yep.
start working your way through that list.
Yeah, we'd give you the calendar, and I think the important thing too is we can identify the funding, but we would also identify for you the match requirements, because we don't want to put you in a situation where like, hey, there's an application that's open, but, it's a 50-50 match, and you have a $4 million need, maybe you get $2 million, which would be great, but where's the other 2 going to come from? And you have to have that ready to go. The other thing that will constantly make you, as in the staff, and they can forward it on to the board, is just identifying new programs or programs that are opening up. Just so you know that, hey, there might be a new trails program at the federal level. And you can decide, is that something we have a project, ready to pursue? Or, no, we're going to pass on that. Because that comes up. There's just so much happening, especially at the federal level. Those opportunities come up.
A quick question about grants. I don't know how to say it. Have you worked with things like the trails, like for instance, in Letchworth State Park, which is not far from here, they just built an autism trail.
Okay.
And that money was partially funded through a grant that dealt with, folks with disabilities. And have you done work with that? And would there be opportunities for us in terms of like recreation and that kind of thing to, go in that direction? I know the Golisano Foundation does a lot of work with those
Yeah.
kinds of things too.
Yeah, we have not done any work with, special needs or autism trail or recreational amenities. We haven't done that, but I do know that there's funding out there. I know Saratoga Springs is pursuing funding. I could find out what source that is. There's a community I'm working with on a plan in Abington Township. In Pennsylvania, they're doing a whole special needs recreation plan, looking at those specific issues. But again, if that's something that's considered a priority, we can certainly look at what the possibilities are.
It almost seems like it'd be a perfect niche for BOCES, and they have quite a bit of land up there too. In the center of the county.
Deb?
So we talked about short-term, long-term plans, and you're probably pretty aware that we are going through the beginnings of a strategic plan, which is
Yeah.
probably going to take a year to get to. Could you give me a definition of what you consider a short-term project would be? And for long-term, can you give me a definition as a long-term project? Are we looking as a long-term 1 to 2 years out? And is a short-term project weeks or months away? Can you give us a handle
Yeah.
on the timing so we have a clear idea?
So in the presentation, I talked about, if you can identify a quick win, because it just gives everybody confidence in the process. So I would call the Fairgrounds project a short-term project. Yes, once you get the money, it might take a year to actually get it built or whatever. But from our perspective, in terms of going after funding, securing that, that's a short term. And looking at the list that we had identified with key projects and our discussion, what I would consider long-term would be your rural health initiative. Because in discussions on that, I think that's great, it's needed, but there's no plan. Or I'm sure there's some plans out there, but there's been discussion, there's no kind of like, we need to do the following 4 things. So that might take, a year or 2 to develop that plan and then put some numbers behind what's required. So that could be a 2 or 3 year initiative, depending upon what's going on. So short term, I'd see like less than a year to secure the funding. Long term could be 1 or 2 years or longer.
I'm not sure which appendix I'm on. I think it might be the last one. The funding application deadlines.
Yes.
Is that something we could get, that calendar structure, get something for the board that's got a little bit more meat where it lists the program, but maybe even a quick, a 1-paragraph description of the program, what it intends to fund, and maybe we as a board can use that when we start talking about short-term, long-term, and when to have these project lists prepared for you. It would give us some focus maybe in saying, okay, we know that the EDA funding is due in March, so let's front burner that, or,
Yeah.
That might help us, because it sounds like with the inclusion of the comp plan, it sounds like the board is going to need to do some planning sessions of its own and, kind of build our own project list and priority list. And if we had a little bit more information on those specific programs and when they're usually come due, it'll give us an opportunity to prioritize.
Yeah, yeah, we could certainly do that.
I agree,
Question?
Brooke. I think that would be really important, because I know there's many things that we've talked about and see how they work into with some of the key things with the comp plan too, because a lot of them do. So I think there's some good projects on the docket, so, and I would like to have that planning time with that too, so, thank you.
Yep. Legislator Sear?
How you doing? Thanks for coming out today. You did a very good presentation. So while this legislature is budgeting for their share portion of these grants, what are we factoring in on your end for your services?
Well, we just, our contract was signed, it was $7,000 a month, so, that was a year-long contract. So I think the way our contract is set up is that it has a 30-day out. So if you're not happy with what we're doing, it's cancel it, it's over in 30 days. And so, we look to see how we're doing after a year. If you're happy with what we're doing, then we propose another contract and we continue to work. But I think that's a good monthly number to move forward with, hopefully in the future.
Okay. Is there any costs that go above and beyond the $7,000 a month retainer?
Just incidental expenses, associated with travel or It's not really been production of materials, but things like that, incidentals.
And does this include an unlimited fountain of grants, or is it?
We've identified within the initial application, initially three projects. But depending upon the project and the initiative, we could certainly talk about that in terms of, if that would be additional requirements. As an example, I would say, like the rural health initiative, if you want us involved in the planning of that and structuring that initiative, that would probably be an additional contractor scope, because that's longer term and that needs to be put together. But the one initiative as outlined here was the ARC grant funding and development. Yeah, that's something we can certainly do within the scope, and also the federal funding that we've talked about with the agricultural fairgrounds project.
Very good. Thank you for answering my questions.
I have one more question. So as we start having these grants come in, I'm positive about that. I know in working with grants for many years that there's always an admin fee. So when you're putting the grants together, do you write some of your costs for administering these grants through your company
Yeah.
into the grant, or no?
You have to be careful about that because certain grant applications, they would consider what we do either pure application or like government relations lobbying. So they don't want to pay for that. We could look at a way, potentially, depending upon the grant, how to do the administrative portion of that grant work, and have the grant paid for that. But I would say, don't count on it.
Okay.
It's hard to do.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So can you clarify that a little more? So you're saying in a grant application, you would forego any ask for administrative costs?
I wouldn't forego it. I would just say that you have to be careful. Let's just say it's the fairgrounds project. Okay, there's our fee that we've been brought under to help advocate and advance that project. We can't put that fee into the fairgrounds project once the federal funding is secured. They won't let you do that at the federal level. There might be a way to structure, a portion of our contract in the future as pure project administration, where some grants might allow you to do that. So it just depends upon the grant. But that's why I'd say don't count on it. Don't count on being able to do that. Yes. Yeah. And the other thing with that is, within those grant applications, some of them, you could build in a project administration fee for your staff to do it. So that's the other way to do it.
Is that common?
Yeah, it is common, yeah.
It is. And the one thing too is lots of times with not having the resources and staff sometimes on administering and keeping up with it, getting the paperwork in and that, that is kind of one thing I think we were looking at too. So I guess it depends on the grant.
Depends on the grant, but, we're willing to help assist in terms of that application or the administration process, even if it wasn't built into the application.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
Guess I've got a question for the back, so Carissa doesn't feel like she gets out of the whole morning without working. How do you foresee this happening? So say Delta sends administration a heads up. This funding is open, here's what it's for. We think it would be a good fit for your county, but I don't see a project on your list that would work. Would you consider taking something like that, dumping it into the committee of jurisdiction and saying, Delta, clued us in, this is coming. Say it's economic development, something or other. You give it to Deb and say, why don't you guys as planning and development work on this as a committee and see if you can target a project that might fit? Or should the committee just deliberate and say, that's not something we're interested in, so we'll pass on this one? How is this going to work?
Well, we can do that, but I think prior to bringing it to committee, I would want to make sure you guys had as much information as possible. I know you're not into the nitty-gritty the way this back table is, and especially Keir. He's been updating the list of potential projects, not just for the county, but the ones that we know the municipalities might be interested in that are larger projects. And we'd want to bring forward the ones that might match that grant opportunity so that the committee could really have, this is what we know about. And maybe you like something in there and we could, move that forward. And it might be something we have a lot of information about. It might be something we have nothing on. Obviously, the ones that we have a lot of info makes it a lot easier to work with. Or the committee of jurisdiction might look at all that and say, that's all lovely, but have you ever considered X? And it might be something we've never considered, and it might be something not on our list. For instance, we were looking at projects to bring forward to Delta to start chewing away at. We picked 5, because 5 was a manageable number to wrap our minds around. Some of that was the timing. You want a project that doesn't need to be done today if the funding can't be released until next year. Some of it is, do you have enough information available? Do you have a study to support that? Do you have firm numbers, firm contacts? And, I think we did a pretty good job on the first 4, but the 5th one just came up, a conversation at the table on health and all of our human services that tie to health and tying back to our space needs as well. And that might be a good thing to look at, starting a conversation on a health building. Not just for our health department, but for community health in general in human services. And so we put that on there as kind of a question mark, like what opportunities would be available for that? Is that something we should be considering having a larger conversation and doing some homework on? So you never know what an out-of-the-box conversation might bring. It might bring something that's not on the list. So I think that conversation with your committee of jurisdiction would be appropriate.
Okay, thanks. Legislator Burke?
We had talked at one time about actually hiring a grant writer that would also work with the towns and village. I'm assuming this is going to replace that. If going with you guys, we would not, or would we still want to look at a grant writer that would work with them and then would be responsible to be on that team as a contact?
I think you've made a lot of progress. It might not seem like it right now, but this contract for this type of grant consulting is huge. The work that Keir's office is doing in updating our project list, so we have a master project list that's up to date. I think the last one was prior to COVID, is huge. He has also sent 2 people now, is it, to grant writing?
One currently is the most trained at.
Yes. So we're working on getting some people up to speed on grant training through Keir's office. I think we can let that dust settle and then see what we can do if you need an extra body to work on grants for towns. If that's something this board wants to do, what's that look like? Are we doing it with any fees associated back to the towns to fund the position? Do you need more than one position? How much work are you going to approve projects on a case-by-case basis? I think there'd be a lot of questions surrounding that we might be prepared to look at in the very near future. But for right now, I know Keir's hired some people, and they're getting their feet on the ground on grants.
Doing a lot of
Project development is what he's saying.
Mr. Blood?
To your point about the projects that come up in our discussions yesterday relative to the bridge on County Road 46, I mean, that created, the discussion came up, and there were some immediate opportunities that we might be able to pursue. So I think that's one of the things that, having Delta or any group of this nature that has at their fingertips what may be some potential funding opportunities. That's an example of something that immediate need just came up, and here's a potential solution. So, that's something that would probably come to the DPW discussion, to the committee, and see what they might be able to do to move that forward. So there are some alternatives out there, and Darren and Luke were right on top of, hey, this is an important bridge, maybe we could use XYZ funding. So to your point of something comes up, so.
Thanks. I mean, a lot of this is a chicken and egg thing. It's so we're going to have to. So there's going to be a learning curve as far as you come to us and say, there's funding available for this that may not be in our top 50 ranked priorities for projects. But if the funding is there, it will require a conversation and determine, well, yeah, it is something we want to do. As you said, well, but the match is $2 million. We don't want to do it $2 million much, but we might want to do it $50,000 much. So I'm interested to see how this relationship forms and works, and I'm excited about the possibilities of, like Mike said, the challenges we face as a rural county with a small tax base, and any help we can get from outside sources, I'm looking forward to.
Darren, I want to make sure we don't miss the Gateway project, because the Crossroads has been a long-term, and we know that's a pretty well-developed project.
Yeah, I think in looking at that application or the information you sent, there's been a lot of work done, a lot of engineering work, a lot of thought into the infrastructure. So my thought on that is, the map that you sent to us and we use, stretching that out a little bit to see what the future possibilities are, because I think that can help some of the funding audiences see that this is part of a larger strategy, phased approach. So, yeah, definitely.
Mike?
Have you eyeballed any of these projects yourself?
I have not physically looked at, let's say, the Fairgrounds project or the Gateway project. So honestly, we came into town yesterday, got on, we stayed at the Saxon Inn, Alfred, beautiful place, beautiful university. That's generally been my exposure in person, so.
Thank you.
Gretchen?
I guess I just have a question. I guess I wasn't aware it changed to Gateway and when it changed, and I don't know who else. So.
It was quick.
It was quick.
So, yeah, and I'll
I
take
didn't
credit or blame for that. So originally it was called the Travel Center Project, right?
Crossroads.
Project, okay. Yeah, so I like Gateway because it's kind of in conversations we were talking about Gateway to the Western Wilds. It just sounded better from a funding standpoint as opposed to Crossroads. So, that's the way we put it. And honestly, like the Fairgrounds project, we just submitted it as the Fairgrounds project, right? And then it came back what you saw on the screen. So that's how they worded it for potential funding.
I just was wondering, I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
against it or anything like that, it's just like Gateway. So, it drummed into us as Crossroads for so long.
Yeah.
It'll have Allegheny County on it, though, correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
It did. It did.
Legislator Ricky, do you have some?
Not to pour water on it, but I just drove into the town of Alman from Hornell yesterday, and it says, "Welcome to the Gateway," or Alman, the gateway to Allegheny County.
Oh, okay.
We'll have to work on that. Yeah, it really has, yeah.
Yeah.
Gretchen, I think the end result is still the same. The way to get there maybe might have to make some changes.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, once funding is secured, you can rename it something else, and depending upon who the tenants are or the people that are involved, you can look at it as a Crossroads, Gateway, or something different.
Legislator Demick.
Just to give a little heads up, I know we've got a lot of studies going on. And this is, to give an example, EMS, we all know that's a very expensive future jump for us. And you don't see that on a list at this time because basically we're not prepared. Until you're prepared to make this happen, that's why a lot of this consulting's going on. So you have something on the shelf to hand these gentlemen to move forward. That's the type of things they're talking about having to have. Instead of just saying, hey, I got this idea, there's got to be some work done prior. Just, just to let you know that the EMS thing will probably be a future venture on this. Good shared service project, things like that. But just thought I'd add that.
Yeah, and it was identified by the staff team in terms of a multi-use facility. I don't know where that will end up going in terms of 911 center dispatch, but if there was a potential to start putting that together, I've seen a lot of communities do that, then you're tapping into, maybe Homeland Security funding at the federal level, SAFER grants, and then bus and bus facility grant applications through Federal Transit Administration, other state programs. So that multi-use facility, that could be nice in terms of putting together a lot of different funding sources.
Yeah, that's where it really starts getting complicated for us. It's, how do you leverage the different funding sources and marry what maybe you wouldn't traditionally think of as a good pairing into getting the most bang for your buck. He's right. We have so many studies going on right now. In about 9 months, you're gonna have more information than you could ever possibly want. But until then, I think the admin team came up with a pretty good list to get started on. Anything else? Mayor, you want an opportunity? Do you have anything, or?
No, I'd just like to thank you for the invitation. This is the type of thing that I think the county can take advantage of, obviously, and I think some of the municipalities should start to think along these lines. First, we have to spend our $4.5 million bucks. So.
Yep.
But on a serious note, I think that this is the way that we need to be thinking if we're going to grow. Certainly, the lifestyle and the economics of these municipalities.
Thanks. Mike?
Yeah, I would like to point out that not only is Mayor Shaler the mayor of the village of Wallsville, but he's also a member of the IDA board also. So I want to thank him for being here today.
Okay. Last chance? Long lunch? Okay, if there's nothing else, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today and the information. We look forward to building the relationship and seeing the results.
Yep, thank you.
That's our sole agenda item for the morning. Is there anything for the good of the order? If not, would anyone care to make a motion to adjourn? What's that? No?
Oh, we're done.
Today.
Wednesday, we have 2.
We got 2 in the morning and an afternoon session.
Well, I won't be here, but if there is something else. Am I missing something for later this morning?
Is there anything else you want to discuss with us while we're here?
No, not off the top of my head. I'm looking forward to Wednesday. We're going to have a... What's that? Did someone make a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Gretchen. And Adam seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.